evening. Good evening. My name is Janelle Riley. I'm an associate features editor at Variety. I'm so thrilled to welcome you here for this SAG Foundation conversation with Kill Your Darlings, the movie you just saw. And at this time, I am thrilled to welcome, I guess, two of the darlings. First joining us is just one of the most exciting actors that I can remember seeing in a long, long time. You may have seen him in The Chronicle, Place Beyond the Pines. He'll soon be playing Harry Osborn in the upcoming Amazing Spider-Man 2. Please welcome Dane DeHaan. Also joining us is an actor of stage and screen. If you're lucky enough, you got to see him on stage in plays like Equus or How to Succeed. There's one person nodding their head. How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. He's also been in some movies, such as The Woman in Black and this little indie series called Harry Potter. Please welcome Daniel Radcliffe. So nice to see you two getting along after what we just went through. Congratulations on really great performances and in a beautiful movie.
Thanks. Thank you.
Because this is a SAG audience, I always like to start by asking, how did you get your SAG card?
Okay, so I did an episode of Law & Order SVU, but I didn't join SAG at the time, and then I think I did this like trial anti-smoking commercial where I was like a patient in a waiting room, and that's when I like had to join. So that's when I joined.
I'm not even sure. Would that be my first job in America?
Yeah,
that would be Kill Your Darlings then. So
you got your SAG card on this movie?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've never done like a filming job in the States before this. So yeah.
That's right. Because Woman in Black was shot in England too.
Woman in Black was in England. Taylor Panama was in Panama. Yeah, everything. Obviously, Harry Potter was all in at home as well. So yeah.
So this made you
legal?
This
is my first job working on a film outside the UK. So it was really exciting.
That's fantastic. Get ready to pay your dues.
Yeah.
Literally. Yeah. The good news is you can vote in the SAG Awards this year.
Hey.
And they send you screeners.
Nice. And I bet they send loads. I bet you get loads before the BAFTA ones as well, don't you?
We don't really get into BAFTA.
I know, exactly. That's the thing. You must get loads before. Everything's ahead in America.
So I want to start with Kill Your Darlings. I know this was a movie that was in the works for a long time. How did the script find its way to you, and what attracted you to your respective roles?
Well, I mean, I was doing Equus on Broadway when John Krakidis, the co-writer and director, came to see the show, and yeah, he sent me the script after that, and I loved it immediately. It was such great writing. It was such a complicated story, yet it was very immediate and hit you in a very kind of emotional and visceral place, and. Yeah, and then on meeting John, a question that I've been asked over a lot of the last few days has been like, what was, did you have any trepidation before working with a first-time director? And like, no, because I mean, when you meet John, it was so clear immediately that he had such a vision for this film, and one that he had lived with and refined for a long time already, and that was 5 years ago, and. Yeah, so he was somebody it was very easy to have kind of immense confidence in very quickly.
I was just sent the script by my agents, and it's always, when you read a really great script, it's such a rare find and such an exciting thing. And the role, it was like, read the script and look at the role of Lucian, who's also like this incredibly complicated, incredible person, and had a lot of elements of that I felt like I hadn't really done before in my roles. So then I flew to New York and read with Dan and with John, and luckily that went well, and here I am.
Daniel, did you actually audition for this film?
I did, yeah. Initially, when around the time that I was doing Equus, and it was important to me too because you know, coming off a big series like that, you are very aware that your name carries a certain cachet with it for a certain period of time, and you know you want to be. And I was given advice by several people whom I admire, who always said you have to sort of look out for the fact that people are. Basically I wanted to audition so that if I was so terrible that I couldn't do the job, John would be forced to confront the fact and wouldn't give it to me. And I needed to know that he was, that he wanted me for all because he thought that I could play the part as much as anything else. And I think I needed to prove something to myself in that and to him and yeah. So I because people sometimes labor under the assumption that, when I have meetings with directors, sometimes people don't think I will audition for things, and I always say, I really want this, please, if you want me to audition, I would love to, because, there's no point in pride if you want to fight for a fucking part. Sorry, I mean, that's so, and also I was very aware that, other than Potter, he wouldn't have really, Equus, of course, but, other than those things, he wouldn't have a chance to have seen me and other stuff, so I wanted to have that experience of him working with me, so yeah.
So did you two first meet in was it a chemistry read, or is it fair to call it that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. That's where we first met, yeah.
And did you know at the time that it was going to be Dane?
Pretty quickly, yeah. I mean, it was, he was the first person that auditioned that day, and, kind of did make life very hard for everybody else that came after him. And, because there was the immediate thing that struck you when you walked into the room, and, up till this point, you've only been reading the script and looking at photos of Lucian, and so that was the only image I had. Now I can only think of you, but, at the time, I, could only see these photos, and, of course, Dane walked in, and there is a striking resemblance, first and foremost, but then, to have given the performance that he gave in that audition as well it was fantastic, and yeah, it was no contest for the rest of the day, really.
What was the scene you guys did?
We did the scene when we first meet, and then we did the scene right before I go to the Merchant Marines when we're kind of saying goodbye.
Wow.
Or when you're saying goodbye.
Someone's still a little bitter.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
little bit of Ginsberg poke through there. And this whole ensemble, you guys all have such great chemistry together. Was the chemistry between you guys instantaneous? Was it developed on set, not just with you guys, but with Jack Houston and Ben Foster?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think, a combination of both. We didn't have a whole lot of time to make the chemistry before we got onto set. We did have, a week of rehearsal. The director took us through a bunch of, improvs and stuff. It kind of felt like being at drama school again. But it was really helpful, and he kind of threw us into intimate situations from the start where we really had to trust in one another, I mean, Dan and I kind of hit it off from the start in terms of friendship and stuff like that. It wasn't like we were battling to make a love for one another happen, but that process definitely helped to it aided in that chemistry.
And also there was, I think, everyone who was involved in the film really came to it with an attitude. They were ready to kind of give of themselves and all kind of pitch in and work together and engage with each other and have fun and try to recreate some semblance of the camaraderie of the original beats. And yeah, it was. And also I think John, the director, does definitely deserve a lot of credit for doing things like organizing a sort of a first night party, as it were, just for everyone to meet and sort of get together and trying to, everyone these things only work if everyone makes an effort to hang out and engage with each other, and we were lucky on this film, we had a great group of people who all did.
Well, as I recall, I think you shot it in 24 days?
Yeah, 24 days.
Wow. And I'm going to guess that the budget for this movie was probably smaller than the catering budget on Harry Potter or Spider-Man. So I'm going to assume this was a passion project for everyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely. For every single person, you know, they were all passionate about it, and we were all in it for all the right reasons. And you know, consequently, you know, everyone was just. It always makes your job a lot easier when you can trust in the people around you. And I definitely always felt that way on set.
Was there any particular scene that was difficult for you, either logistically or just emotionally?
Logistically, they were all difficult scenes. That was shot in 24 days, as you just mentioned. I mean, you know, that was one of the triumphs of this film, and I think it's, you know, in these moments when there's two actors sitting on stage, it's very easy to sort of end up just talking about the acting or just talking about, you know, John. But the fact that this film was made for so little money and you know, in so little time, that it doesn't end up looking that good unless like a lot of people work hard. And I mean, the heads of, I mean, makeup and hair, costume, the production design, and Reed Morano, our director of photography, like they, to do what they did with the time constraints, I mean, was just, I mean, amazing. In terms of scenes that were particularly tricky, one scene that I had thought was going to be tricky, but actually ended up not being, was when we actually came to film one of those scenes that we'd done for the audition, the goodbye scene, because it had been the scene that I did when I auditioned, and then it was the scene that Dane had done when he'd auditioned, so we'd both done it a lot, and knew it really, really well. And I always, you know, worry about that, and you know, think because if I'm having this emotional response to it every time I read the script, will I then be able to keep that fresh for when I'm doing it? And John did this fantastic thing before we started the scene. He asked the crew to leave the room, and he just took me over to one side and said, you know, that your goal in the scene is just to not let him leave, whatever happens. Then he took you to one side and said something to you, and he's just asked us to improvise the scene away from the script. And within seconds, like we were both sort of, you know, floods of tears, and there was something incredibly powerful about that, and I'd never really had that level of intensity of feeling, just, and because I never quite believe it when somebody says, oh, I just became that character. You didn't become a different character, nothing happened. But what you were was completely emotionally open and honest and available to somebody else. And that isn't something that happens all the time, and when it does happen in that context, it was just thrilling.
For you?
Yeah, well, I mean, like Dan said, I mean, all the scenes kind of presented their own challenges because of the time constraint. But, I mean, for instance, like the scene that we shot on the steps of the library when I'm leaving and Dan comes up to me and, you know, convinces me to not leave. We shot that scene in 12 minutes. And, you know, it's a pretty emotionally tight, you know, elevated scene. And also we were, at the time, getting a lot of pressure from the security of Columbia to get off of campus because they wanted to go to bed, and we had like it was just time for us to go, and we had to get the scene.
By the way, what I love is that when John tells his story, our director's not here tonight, but we've heard him tell this story a lot over the last couple of days, and when John tells his story, he always says, there was some mix-up, and we had to finish 5 hours early. Yeah. Like, I'm sure that wasn't the case. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, and then, you know, I spent an entire night naked in the Hudson River, which presented its own set of challenges.
Yeah,
sure.
and he did not, there was not a word of complaint. Like, he was stoic. It was fantastic.
Obviously, this film is set before either of you were alive. What sort of research, if any, did you do into the time period and into specifically these iconic characters?
I mean, John asked us to only research our characters during this time period, which obviously made it quite helpful because there was a huge amount to digest about Alan if you want to. And, you know, his diaries were the first sort of port of call, really. You know, he writes, he really, you know, he paints a very clear picture of himself at that age, and, you know, sort of concentrating on the differences between what you are and what you want to be, and, you know, that's a very powerful thing, I think, at that age particularly, and the gap between that and the struggle between those two things was one of the things I sort of latched onto with Alan and really liked. Was one of the things that appealed to me about playing him, because it seemed complicated and interesting. And in terms of the period, like I like to think I know a little bit about the 40s in America and sort of what was going on. But the main thing for me in terms of getting a sense of it was, as always, is music, and I sort of made endless trawling of iTunes for stuff from the 40s and 50s, because that's the thing, it's not the famous songs from that era we all know and sort of can't really give a sense of that era, because if they're that famous they've become classics, they're now sort of timeless, they've been covered so many times. But whereas actually finding those songs that there's only one terrible recording of it from the 1940s, and like getting a sense of the stuff they would have been hearing just all around them was kind of fun.
Yeah, well, you know, the script does, I think, a really great job of presenting Lucian very accurately for this time of his life. But if, you know, I did go back and read Ginsberg's diaries and correspondence between Ginsberg and Kerouac. Edie Parker wrote a memoir, and Edie and Lucian were actually like best friends at this time historically. So there are little tidbits about him, like really interesting stories, things he did, like he stood on the dock of a ship and sunk it just to feel what it was like to be on a sinking ship. He like would go to a restaurant and order the most expensive steak raw just so he could throw it in the waiter's face. He would be drinking at a bar, like drinking wine, and he would look at the person next to him and bite off the glass and chew the glass in his mouth just to get a reaction from him, you know. And so like these kinds of things, I think, helped me to discover kind of the spine and the essence of who he was, but really also just validated the Lucian that was already in the script.
How method are you? Did you go to any restaurants and bite wine glasses?
You know, I ate the glass, but I just couldn't do the steak.
That's where you draw the line.
That's where I draw the line.
Was there anything you uncovered in your research that actually was surprising to you that you didn't know? I actually didn't know much about Lucian Carr. This whole period was a surprise to me.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I didn't know this story, you know. I obviously knew the Beats. I was familiar with some of their work, and I knew what they stood for, but I certainly didn't know how they became who they became, how they, you know what I mean? And I certainly had never heard of Lucian, so it was an entirely new story to me. And one of the things that I think is great about it is a story that not a lot of people know, but really everybody should.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I knew nothing about Ginsberg's personal life, really. And the thing that stood out for me as something that just, you know, seemed like a fascinating detail was the relationship with his mother, and obviously it was a key thing in the film. But it really was. I mean, the more I thought about that, kind of, the more fascinated by it I became. Just because of the idea of him, you know, as a young man having to visit your mother in institutions and to be seeing her like that, and that must lead to a sense of kind of not wanting to see her because it's so upsetting and frightening, and then the guilt that would come from, you know, having to deal with the fact that on some level you don't want to see your mother at that point, but at the same time needing. I mean, it must just have that guilt must have really informed so much of how he related to people at that age, and is a huge thing to try and move beyond. And so it was, it was definitely, because we, you know, it was nice to have him humanized in that way. It's nice to, you know, we do hold these people up as icons of literature, and it's nice to actually portray him at a time in his life when he was just full of doubt and uncertainty and excitement and all those other things too. But that's why it's being 18.
I want to take some questions from the audience, and as always, I apologize in advance if I butcher your name. I feel your pain. Question from Kimberly, for Dan, wants to know what it's like as a Brit to play an American icon, and how did you master that accent?
You know, I don't think of nationality as being something that, you know, I don't really consider it, or other than the challenge of having to do the accent. You know, that's beyond that. I don't think it. You know, it's obviously important to think of where a character comes from, and you know, but there's no. I certainly wasn't intimidated by the idea of playing an American. It was just there were certain things I knew I had to get right, and the accent is. You know, I'm fairly lucky in that I have a relatively decent ear for accents, and I don't have my dad's ear, thankfully, because that was like a joke in our family growing up, because he's so terrible at all of them. But yeah, and after that, after sort of, you know, starting to get to grips with it, it becomes just a case of doing it and doing it and doing it and repeating it and talking in it as much as the people who love you can bear, and just trying to live with it as much as possible. And then when I'm on set, I just talk in it all the time, because it's much easier than going back and forth.
Well, it's not only an American accent, it's an American accent of a specific time and place.
Yeah, but yeah, no, I mean, it was a job trying to find old people from New Jersey on the internet. It was like it was.
Try Craigslist.
There's lots of eventually you can they're out there. There's yeah, it's one of the fun parts of my job is the stuff I ended up, you know, the strange unrelated things I ended up listening to discussed because of the perfectness of the accent I was hearing.
I have a question from Michelle Coyle for everyone, except me, I presume. Wants to know, what was your worst audition experience, and was there ever a role you desperately wanted and didn't get?
I remember auditioning for, I think it was Puck in Midsummer's Dream when I first got out of college, and like my cell phone kept ringing. Oh. And I was halfway through the monologue and it wasn't going that great anyway. And then my cell phone rang, and then, you know, of course they're like, "Oh, that's okay," but you're like, "Actually, no, it's not," and we all know, we all know it's not okay. And then I feel like it rang again, but maybe it's just, I mean, that was definitely my most devastating experience.
Oh, but what a fair turn for the actor's cell phone to ring during an audition.
That's true, but, you know.
Did you appreciate the irony at the time?
I can't say I did.
By the way, mindset, when you said you auditioned for Puck, I was like, you went out for Glee?
Oh, no.
Glee, Shakespeare.
I do remember there was a film I auditioned for before Potter that I really wanted and I didn't get, and I do remember being devastated at the time because I was going to get to play, I think, Christian Bale's son, which was going to be super cool, and I didn't get it. It was Equilibrium, but I didn't get that, and then I got Potter, so swings and roundabouts.
Yeah, I think you just named the one Christian Bale movie I haven't seen.
There you go. It may have been released under a different title, who knows?
No, I just haven't seen it. Question from Colleen Braw. Wants to know, what's one thing you know now as an actor that you wish you knew when you started? Just one?
No, exactly. You know, there was a lot, on Potter, I really just was kind of having fun at the start and not really worrying about the acting, and then as I learned how much I loved it and started taking it seriously, I guess it was really just always a case of trusting my instincts, and I didn't, you know, when I watch those films, there are moments that I go, okay, that's fine, and then there are moments where I see my instincts obviously didn't quite know what to do there, and, you know, you can sort of see the join, as it were. And, you know, there's definitely certain things that actually, you know, John talked to me about on Kill Your Darlings that I'd never really been, and it's going to sound, this is slightly embarrassing to admit in front of all you guys, but you know, I had never been talked to just some very basic ideas about, you know, what do you want out of this scene? What is your character, when you say that line, what effect are you trying to have on that person? And, you know, I think I would have loved to know some of that stuff earlier on, to be honest, because it is definitely it's been incredibly helpful, and now, like, you know, now I love breaking down a script. Now I know how to break down a script, and I have a technique which I can fall back on, you know, when my instincts you know, aren't enough, and I have some, or aren't a good enough way in, or I need to, you know, I need some help. I actually have something, a process now to fall back on, rather than just sort of, wondering and feeling like, oh, it must be me. So you know, it's definitely I suppose that. Yeah.
You know, I think I've just become a lot less critical of things. You know, I never knew a movie was made in 24 days. You know, like when I was in acting school, I just had all these opinions, and I thought I knew just everything, and you know how everything was done. And I guess I just thought, like, you know, all films are created equal, and they all have the same amount of time, and you know, it's you know, you think of it as like this really cushy thing. And I think as I've gone along and seen, you know, all the constraints that happen on different films and all the circumstances, I've become a lot less critical, for sure.
I'm curious because you both started acting at such a young age. When did you know it was something you wanted to do for a career, or was it just fun in the beginning?
You know, I really didn't do it professionally until like 5 years ago. So for me, it was always just fun. Growing up, I mean, I don't really have like an aha moment. I grew up playing dress up, and then like the place I was going to church had like this pamphlet for a musical theater camp that I started going to when I was 4 years old. And by the time I was in high school, I was like just sleeping through classes, and then going to rehearsal for the school play, and then like shoving fast food in my mouth, and going to rehearsal for the community theater play until like 11 at night. And it's just like always what I have always obsessed over and wanted to spend my time doing.
It was really on the, I mean, I knew I loved it, and I knew I loved being a part of filming, and you know, I definitely had, like, when I got to a film set for the first time when I was 9 on David Copperfield, I definitely had like I have arrived sort of moment. Like, I definitely was like, I felt just happier than I was at school, and I was having a great time. And you know, it was one of those things where like all the stuff that got me shouted at school was valued on a film set. And like, you know, like hyperactivity and talking a lot and being kind of, you know, and enjoying getting involved rather than sitting still and being told to, and you know, regurgitate information. So you know, I always knew I loved it, but I think the moment that I really started to see the possibilities of acting and to see specific and to start to have specific ambitions for myself as an actor beyond just staying on a film set was the third Harry Potter film, when I worked with Gary Oldman and David Thewlis, because I think that before that, you know, all the older actors that we had on set treated me like a kid, because I was a kid. But then even when I turned 14, they initially had known me as a kid, so you know, I understand why it was hard to, you know, move out of that for them. But then Gary Oldman and David Thewlis met me as a 14-year-old, and so treated me kind of like as a young man, and really, you know, were very generous with me in a way that everyone had been, but in a way that they were just differently, and it was very cool. So yeah, third film.
Question from, oh, forgive me, Jordan Van Rocken? Oh, so sorry.
Yeah, but Jordan Van Rocken would be an awesome name as well.
And an awesome band. Wants to know what advice you have for young adults trying to make this a long-term career. She points out, I'm not going to say your age because you don't know this yet, but you're not supposed to tell that. But she's a teenager.
Gosh, I don't know. You know, as long as you're doing it for all the right reasons, then just keep fighting the good fight, you know, and just keep standing up for what you believe in and why you want to do this, and follow that passion, you know. That's really, for me, that's always been what it's about, you know. This has always been what I love to do, and I could never imagine myself doing anything else. So I just kind of went unabashedly towards that goal. And if that's what you want to do, then, you know, don't be shy. Go for it.
And then, you know, if you are ever lucky enough to be able to do this for a living, then just remember how lucky you are, because there's a lot of people who would love to be doing it, and that's it. I can't speak to getting into the industry because I just, you know, won the lottery. So it's harder in that way for me to comment on that or give advice. But I can say, like, once you're in it, just you know, we're in an industry where you can have an amazing time and enjoy it, because it really is, I think, the best job in the world.
Rejection is so hard at any age, but you know, I'm trying to imagine as a kid auditioning, and you said you were devastated when you didn't get the part in that awful Christian Bale
Yeah,
movie.
but that was more about, shit, how am I going to get out of school? Like, that wasn't so much about, like, that was, because that was what film offered me at first, was like the way I didn't have to go to school. And I mean, I still had to do schooling, but I didn't have to be at school where I was with teachers that hated me, and like, you know, I didn't have to, you know, do that. So it was, so yeah, I mean, sorry, I've forgotten the beginning of the question now.
Oh, just how do you deal with
I mean,
rejection
I actually think, like, when I look back, like, I was amazingly relaxed through all my Harry Potter auditions. Like, I was so chilled about it, and I was never nervous. Auditions were always, like, really fun as a kid. I remember thinking, like, I remember really enjoying it.
Question wants to know what inspires you? You're very uninspired. I don't know.
Okay, honestly, athletes. Athletes of across all sports. I mean, I could name specific ones. Some of them would be cricketers you'd never have heard of, but there's a lot of American footballers and boxers and people in there as well. Just because I think, you know, I used to, between the matinee and the evening show of How to Succeed on a Saturday, when we were like 9 months into the run and beyond that, I would watch the 5 hours ahead boxing from on Saturday night that was going on in London, because I would just watch it and go, if they can do 12 rounds of that, I can get through that dance number again. and I just think that the dedication and the discipline that athletes have to put in to achieve what they want to is, you know, incredible, and you know, I think I kind of aspire to have that same level of dedication, as I think I know you do, and you know, I think you have to, because it's yeah, it's worth the amount of pride they have in what they do is inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I mean, mine's a little more narrow. Like, I'm just inspired by other actors and actors that I have always looked up to, and you know, kind of the fact that we're lucky enough to do this thing that for me is like this never-ending quest to, like, we get to do something that we will kind of never be good enough at it, as good at it as we want to be, you know. So it's the inspiration to always get better and to try to better myself, and to have found something that I'm actually passionate about. Like, I really am fueled by the work itself.
Christine Nicole wants to know basically what's up next on the horizon. Dane, I'd really like to see you do a movie where you don't try to kill someone. It's 3 in a row now.
Well, I'm gonna play James Dean in this film that Anton Corbin's directing, called Life, and I'm not gonna try to kill anyone, on screen at least.
I'm going back to England to do a new version of Frankenstein with James McAvoy. James is playing Dr. Frankenstein, and I'm playing Igor. Yeah. What hump?
I was just gonna say.
Yeah, no, it's Max Landis who wrote Chronicle, has written the script, and it's by far the most interesting, inventive, and imaginative thing that I've read coming out of a studio since I finished Potter. So I'm excited to, you know, it's one of those things that everyone thinks they sort of know what it will be, but no one knows what it's going to be. Yeah, it's going to be fun.
And you both have films coming out. You obviously have Spider-Man.
Yes, Spider-Man will be coming out in May. Yeah, and then I just, after Spider-Man, I finished this, my first comedy.
Thank God.
Called Life After Beth, that stars me and Aubrey Plaza, and John C. Reilly's in it, and Molly Shannon, and Paul Reiser, and Cheryl Hines, and a whole lot of really funny people. It's like a zombie rom-com, so it'll be...
A zom-com, I believe.
It's a sorry, zom-com. Yeah, and, you know, that'll be coming out sometime. It was an independent, small movie, so we'll see what happens with it, but... Yeah.
And I know you had Horns at Toronto, which everyone loved.
Yeah, Horns was at Toronto, and the F Word was there too. And the F Word, as I think, you know, is probably going to be the one. I imagine the one first out of those two, which will be hopefully out. Hopefully they should both be out in you know, next year sometime. So I'm excited to, you know, for more people to see that, because the F Word also is one for me where I don't have to like cry or get covered in blood or something, and it's just a fun but also very smart movie.
And just out of curiosity, has anyone from either like the Ginsberg estate or the Carr, I don't know if Carr has an estate, has anyone who knew these people given you feedback on the movie?
I mean, I've met a couple of Ginsberg's friends who are really pleased with it and seem to think my portrayal of Alan does some justice to who he was as a young man. So I was obviously thrilled with that. But yeah, I think, I mean, I've met someone from the Ginsberg estate. John, our director, has had more direct dealings with them, but I think from what he said, they seem pretty happy.
Well, you guys did an amazing job. Congratulations again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.